George. This has been fascinating, and now I think I do finally understand what a blockchain is and what its phenomenal potentials are. Thank you very much for this, and thanks, Ken. I'm Bob Vastine. I'm with the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. I'm all about trade, especially trade and services. So I take it that this technology is a massive facilitator of global trade. Agreed?
I think we would agree to that.
So just as I learned 8 years ago from Steve Stewart how the internet facilitates international trade, we realized that the internet's a technology. It's a foundation for trade. It's not trade itself. But governments can abort it. A government can decide that an electronic transaction violates somebody's privacy, and all of a sudden the bank can't do business with Germany anymore. And I'm wondering if the same threat exists here. Secondly, and to what extent can it take into account the rules of the WTO, the GATS, the GATT, and trade remedies? And I think you've suggested contracts to be made to conform to laws about trade remedies. Very complicated. So anyway, if there's a question there, I'd appreciate your comment.
I can take the first one. Yes, you're absolutely right in the sense that governments can have an effect on blockchain, especially through cross-border disputes. Because blockchains or shared ledgers are inherently a global infrastructure, they function most effectively when they're not constrained by borders. But we've already seen countries in every level of development create barriers to the free flow of data. Data localization, buzzword, which is like they confine a business's ability to share data, such as financial data, within the borders. A great example of that is Venezuela, which has already passed laws to say that if you have a financial payment service, you have to have its IT infrastructure, Bitcoin or blockchain, stored within that country. So we're already seeing it, and it's another aspect that's just like the internet policy, where the digital economy or the blockchain economy or whatever you want to, however you want to say it, functions better when there aren't those barriers.
Leon, did you want to, any thoughts on that role of government question, that second?
Well, it's I think there are a couple of aspects of this. You're certainly going to be the experts on, so to speak, whether it will be allowed. Again, I'll just come back to the points that I was making earlier in my presentation. I think there's a huge opportunity at the application level for us. What I thought was really interesting was your comment about, the entrenched interests who are going to be threatened by this technology. I think that is a potential very big barrier to this also. You were talking about the elimination of certain middlemen who are very powerful and generate a lot of revenue in the current sense. So those groups could raise regulatory barriers to this as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting challenges. But from an applications point of view, for an industry like ours, I think there's a huge opportunity.
And I guess, the one thing, if you look at just history in general, supply and demand is going to push this forward. Right? So you can't, it's difficult to say, hey, this is great technology, okay, everybody go implement it globally. That's probably not how this is going to happen. Right? It's going to happen because some large global companies start to implement this, and for people to be able to live their lives the way they want to live them, they're going to force those countries to actually set laws that play along. Right? That's kind of how the world has worked forever. It's really if it gets enough momentum behind it and enough large companies like an IBM and a Microsoft and a Google and an Amazon, and everybody starts to do trade using blockchain technology, and then they realize that they can't do business in that certain country or they're restricted, that country's all of a sudden going to be like, oh wow, now we can't compete globally. Maybe we better change our laws, or I'm not going to be able to compete globally because these companies won't do business with me. Right? Because you're going to start to see the economics of blockchain are really going to change, I think, the way people actually buy and consume goods. And services. And so I think if that is what's probably going to drive this, right, as it gets more mature, as large global organizations actually begin to adopt it, I think that's when we'll start to see the regulatory changes that need to happen. The same thing's happening with cloud computing. right? We have to buy, we are building sovereign clouds, sovereign versions of all of our clouds because of the regulatory challenges. So we have, think of a separate data center region in Canada, in Germany, in China, and it's the same, we're replicating our global cloud service, our commercial service, we're taking a region and replicating it so that it lives in country and is run by the countries of that citizen because of the regulatory laws. Right? Which is a super interesting challenge, right? So, I mean, that could happen with blockchain. I'm not positive, but I mean, it's distributed in nature. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves.
So in the back, yes.
Thank you. My name is Lin Jian. Sorry, my allergy may prevent me from speaking well. I'm from Energy Blockchain Labs. We are a Hyperledger member. We are working on applying blockchain to green finance to promote green development. We are also a member of China's central bank's Green Finance Commission. And we've already had some market share of green finance in China. Our first blockchain project is...
You have a question?
Yeah. Very soon. Yeah, it's based on Hyperledger Fabric, and it's on the alpha test. So my question is, when do you think blockchain technology can be more widely applied to a larger scale?
Right. So this is a question that comes up a lot. Like, where are we on the maturity cycle? When does this hit scale? So, thoughts?
And yeah, that's a really good question. Most of the things that people have built to date have been on 0.6 version of Hyperledger. And 1.0 came out in the first quarter of this year, and I think it's gone through its beta period, and so there were some changes to it. But it really incorporates some of the fundamental requirements that businesses have said, we need this, addressing the throughput issue, addressing the channels issue, right? Because if you wanted to make that permission, visibility of the ledger in 0.6, you essentially had to do it with cryptography. Now there's this concept of channels that makes it easier, right? And there's a lot of development effort, as my peer from Microsoft has said, that we're trying to make it easier to do the things. So in Hyperledger, there's now the Hyperledger Fabric Composer.
So what do you think is going to be? Is it 2017, 2018?
I would say in general, 2017 are your proof of concepts. 2018, you will see trials. And in 2019, you'll start to see people deploying this on broad scales.
Susie, do you agree with that?
I do.
Leon, Alan, any other thoughts? All right. Another question. Ma'am, right here. Yes.
Yes, Carol Copinder from Linkages. Kind of like Leon, I'm already seeing that these various operating systems are in place, and particularly with the Food Safety Modernization Act de facto requiring it. And I represent a client that's doing a lot of this in the marketplace. So we have operating systems that are already being created. So I guess my question is, as we try to find that single operating language, is that this Hyperledger that people are talking about, or will these commercial operating systems that are being created for traceability in the food supply, will they continue to have different languages and have to find an operating platform to talk to one another?
And let's generalize that question.
Please.
And whether it's food safety, whether it's pharmaceutical track and trace legislation, there are legacy systems, things like cloud-based Oracle databases or other types of solutions that purport to do that say they can meet those requirements. Why is blockchain, in its different variants, its different fabrics, why is blockchain a better solution than an Oracle database, for example, or another legacy solution?
I'll start and I'll pass it to my left, but I always ask three questions before I conclude that blockchain is the right technology. I've said, have you tried other technologies and why have they failed? Do you have a business network with multiple parties in it? And is there a trust issue? And if you have those attributes in the problem you're trying to solve, chances are that blockchain is going to be a good solution. I don't think it's going to be the only solution. If you can solve your problem with existing technology cheaper than you can do it with a blockchain, then you should be using that technology. I think this is just going to be another tool in the toolbox. I do not think it's going to take over, the world, right? It's going to solve some really big intractable problems that other technologies haven't solved to date. But if you look at what's happening, SAP made a big announcement where they said, you're not going to replace my system, right, with blockchain, but I'm going to make, I'm going to give you APIs that allow you to pull data out of my system very easily so that you can, very easily construct the blockchain to solve some of the problems that you have across business networks.
Right. Susan?
Can I just a quick follow-up though? Where is that discussion taking place? Is that conversation, is that where the Hyperledger comes in? Is that where that conversation is taking place? Or is it one-on-one, continuing between customers and suppliers? So there is that one, you've got easily 10 or 11 tracing systems in the agri-food community. And so the question is a Walmart, a Costco, a Carrefour, they have numerous suppliers. Where are they creating the one language where they will have an operating platform to talk to one another?
Right. So Hyperledger, the Hyperledger project is one of those. Enterprise Ethereum Alliance is another. And Susie, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, if you think about it as blockchain's in the middle. It's just the ledger,
Right.
right? So it's the distributed ledger. So you still have to do, like when you use the SAP example, that's a great example. SAP is sitting over here. Instead of storing that data in a separate SAP database, and company B does the same thing over here and you have an intermediary, you're going to say, no, I'm going to store this transaction here, right? In this single ledger, distributed ledger, that everybody in my supply chain is going to be able to look at, right? So that's the difference. You still have the back-end processing. People are still going to do things differently, right? On how they process their bills, how they run their companies, right? What types of information they track, right? Depending on what vertical you're in, those will all still be different. But it's the blockchain technology itself, that ledger, right, which will be the same. And that's the language that everybody has to adopt. This is not a new problem. Think about exchanging data with anybody, right? Enterprise application integration, it used to be called, right? EAI and BizTalk server, and there's a whole bunch of other products that were out there to help you do this. Look at EDI, the transactions, right? I mean, you can go on and on about this is the same problem we've always had, right? What we're doing is now making a distributed ledger that talks a single language to allow people to exchange data, and I think that's really the value here. Right, you'll still have to do that back end and front, the back end and front end processing, and it'll be done in a variety of different ways.
Right. So thank you. So I think that's all the time that we have.
So sadly it is. I think this certainly could have been a longer event, a longer conversation. What I'm hearing here is, I think I need to have all of you back here 1 year from today to talk about the next iteration of blockchain. I think we'll all be a little more educated about it. I think with the NAFTA negotiations, it's really an interesting. You told a funny story, Stephen. I was in a meeting in '93 where somebody said there's this thing called the World Wide Web, and you need to know what that is. And I think we're having that conversation. That's what this blockchain conversation is. It's something that we need to be ahead of. We're trying to do that with WIDO, with our Next Gen Trade Initiative. The NAFTA negotiations are really interesting, the renegotiation, because it's a 25-year-old agreement. The World Wide Web didn't really exist at all. It was an idea. It was that was on paper at that point. It was starting to happen, I think, by '92. But blockchain is something that's coming, and I think that's something that our trade negotiators and our discussions that we're going to be having in the future going forward need to think about how we don't get in the way in some cases of these new technologies. So thank you all for doing this. Thanks for being here. Thank you all for this. We promise to have more conversations where we can get deeper into some of these topics. I know all of your organizations do this as well. There's a lot of information out there. Hopefully this gave you all at least some basic building blocks to help understand blockchain, and we hope you can come back to WIDA and we'll help understand some of these other new technologies and the impact on trade in the future. So thank you.